1 week season.
1 week season, fam, La Familia. Welcome back. Mike Johnson here, M Johnson 86, coming to you. DFS FanDuel Labs, week 13. We are excited to be back. We've had a little hiatus, a little 2-week hiatus since we have broken things down here on our live show, well, our recorded show, but our video show focused on FanDuel. We took last week off due to the Thanksgiving holiday, multiple slates. I know the OWS Fam was just killing it in week 12, all over the leaderboards. That was fun to see. I got a lot of things right, did not line them up correctly for a big win, but that's just the nature of the beast. But glad to see, always glad to see the weeks where the orange banners are flying all over the leaderboards, and our Discord channel, the Binks channel, is going nuts. Love seeing it. We love teaching you to fish, as we say. And the boat was full last week. So without further ado, I will bring in Mr. Maximus. How we doing, Max?
Hello. Good to be back. Looking forward to digging into week 13 with you. I myself had a rare showdown sweat on Monday night with the Vikings Bears game. I was in first place till the last play of the game, but it's good to have a sweat, I guess. And ready to roll.
Yeah, it's funny with those showdowns how each play is like so many things are swinging. You've got just so many teams that are constructed, obviously, with the same very small pool of players. So the swings can be pretty extreme there. So got the heart rate up for you on a Monday night, though, it sounds like, which is good for if anybody was watching that game. If anyone was watching that game without something on the line, I feel bad for them because it was hard to watch. It was not a very pretty game. But yeah, we've got an interesting week 13 slate. I believe it's 6 teams on by. We got the Raiders, the Bills, Ravens, Giants. I'm forgetting a couple there, I think. But yeah, 6 teams on by. Some of the bigger name teams there. So it'll be an interesting week to build. We've got coaches getting fired. We've got, Bill Belichick's team falling apart. Like, there's a lot going on in the NFL right now.
Except for Ramondre. He's been kind of rocking lately for the Pats. But,
yeah.
And then we got injuries all over the place this week that, take it with we're doing this, guys, on Thursday morning. There's still a lot to be determined on, this time of year. You get more banged up players to kind of sift through to see who's ready to go, who may be limited. And I think, wasn't there even a doubtful player? I think it was Slayton actually played last week, didn't he? And he was doubtful.
There was 2. So Darius Slayton played after being doubtful. And so Jalen Hyatt, I did the edge right up on that game, and Jalen Hyatt's a guy I kind of talked up. And I did still play him, and it worked out kind of nice. It didn't come together perfectly on some of the rosters I had him on, but especially on DraftKings, he was 3K. I think he put up like 18 points, and kind of was like perfect differentiator for Greg Dortch, Justin Watson lineups, which those guys both ended up all right too. They both scored touchdowns. But Hyatt was it was a nice play. I stayed on him, but I think the Slayton news made it a little tougher to get there. But then also Max Crosby was doubtful for the Raiders. They're like stud defensive end. And he ended up playing through it, and it ended up not really mattering. The Chiefs still kind of smashed. But usually when you get the doubtful tag, I don't know that it's like maybe 1 or 2 all season had played through it. So then to get 2 fairly relevant players, a starting wide receiver and a difference-making defensive player playing through it on one Sunday, that was pretty unique. Yeah, but we are granted with another only 10 game slate this week, which again, I kind of prefer these. I don't know about you, but I prefer these weeks as opposed to um, the weeks where there's like 13 games or whatever. I like the weeks where it's a little smaller, like 10 or 13.
I do too. A little more
Or,
concentration in your approach. It's kind of how I am about showdowns too. We don't really talk about showdowns, obviously. This is the main slate show, but I rarely play showdowns unless it's a concentrated offense to where there's not so many ancillary pieces to account for. And the Bears are the perfect example of that, like with Fields, Moore, Kmet, and then the defense is coming on now too. But so those are usually the showdowns I like to play, and then that carries over the amount of game-wise, coincidentally, when it comes to main slate. Yeah, I agree on that point. And I did read your Edge write-up. And so, yeah, shout out to you. You did mention Jalen Hyatt for sure. I remember reading that. So
sometimes you just follow the young talent and you just stick with it regardless of everything else. All right. Yeah, we'll get into it then. I'll pull up the screen and share. We'll get into your build for this week. Again, I know we've had a couple week layoff. We have some new subscribers after Black Friday. So just a review here, Max builds for the 25K Sunday NFL touchdown on FanDuel. It's a 5-entry max tournament, $65 entry fee. So he puts 5 lineups in there. The structure is really good. $3,000 to first. You got kind of a nice flat payout there towards the top. You've also got 90 positions paid, which is pretty high percentage. A lot of tournaments, it's like 18 to 20% of the field gets paid, but 90 out of 437, that's like 21% of the field. So it's actually down a little from what it used to be. But either way, it's a pretty good structure. It's a winnable tournament. One you don't have to hit the lotto or be absolutely perfect on. So a cool one to build with. And Maximus, I'll let you kind of take it away. Talk us through your lineup here.
Yeah, one more note on, because we weren't here obviously to cover it last week. I had 2 teams, and this is just the irony. In the flex spot on one of them, I had Shaheed, and in the flex spot on the other one, I had Olave, and they both got injured during the game. That's the gambling part of this game, folks. That's the thing. There's just nothing you can do about. If players get injured during game, it just is what it is. It's a hard pill to swallow, but
yeah, Olave actually I had Shaheed, I should say, in the Sunday Million, my best lineup ended up, in 200th place. Out of in the million, there's 145,000 entries. It was like 15 points behind first place, and that lineup, it had Shaheed. So it was like, it's
what happened.
Yeah, and obviously everything, for everyone. I mean, it wasn't a Josh Allen lineup. It had Stroud with Nico, and then Calvin Ridley bring back, and then it had Kieran, Williams, Bijan, and Pacheco as the running backs. So I don't know if it would have got there anyways, but either way, it's, Shaheed. When you saw Olave go out and they had been having success throwing the ball, yeah, and it, I didn't realize how well this lineup was doing till later, but then you look back on it and it's like, oh, Shaheed had 1.9 points or whatever. He went out in the first half. If he breaks one long touchdown, I probably could have had a top 10 finish for a few grand, but I digress. So anyways, back to it. Let's hear about your lineup for this week.
Yeah, I'm going a little bit different. I know we've covered a lot of the quarterbacks that I guess you could consider FanDuel strategy-wise mainstay quarterbacks. And remember, this is a 5-team tournament. So most likely I'll definitely have a Tua team. I'll probably have a Purdy and a Hurts team. But with 5 teams, you leave 1 or 2 teams to be a little more speculative, maybe dive a little deeper, see where there's some other areas that you can attack, and especially when you're playing chalky players. So obviously value opened up with the unfortunate news about Jonathan Taylor. And obviously with pricing, they don't account for that when the pricing's already come out. So we have Zach Moss as one of the running backs. He's one of the two chalky pieces I see along with Dorsch if Wilson doesn't play, maybe for Arizona. But in this case, I have a Kenny Pickett double stack with George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth. Obviously, Freiermuth went off last week. His salary raised about almost $1,000, but it's still at a pretty good price. Canada's gone. Looks like the offense is going to open up more. You definitely have to account for the running game as well, because you can attack Arizona a litany of ways. They're at home against Arizona this week. But, JM did state something, I think it was a year and a half or 2 years ago, where someday the Pickett double stack is going to win somebody $1 million. I remember him saying that. If it was ever a week where it's conceivable, it could be this week. But I'll probably have this team also based on the pricing, is pretty tight. So I have Pickens, Freiermuth, no Arizona run back, but obviously a lot of people would go the Dortch route maybe if Wilson's out. And I think Marquise Brown has a heel injury too at the moment. So then I have Zach Moss. Obviously that will be 50% owned, probably on everybody's team, cash or tournament. It makes sense though. He's playing Tennessee. Zach Moss did great before Taylor came into the fold. It's the kind of chalk where he's going to get the volume, touch, and target-wise to kind of, be able to eat that chalk. Whereas chalk like Dorsch or a wide receiver type chalk, I always feel is much more volatile. So I have Moss, and then I have Tyreek Hill. That Miami-Washington game obviously is a great spot for Dolphins players. We got to keep in mind Tyreek Hill is going for that 2,000-yard goal, or at least definitely he wants to break Calvin Johnson's single-season record. I always keep that in mind with alongside the activity that he has in that offense anyway. We have the New Orleans Saints defense at home against the Lions. Could be an interesting spot. Goff, historically not as good on the road, not very mobile. The Saints are capable of putting together good games defensively. And then I decided with 3 spots based on the big 4:00 game, somewhat similar to last week, although probably not as bountiful as Buffalo and Philly were because San Francisco has an amazing defense. But I wanted to save 2 or 3 late swap spots strategy-wise and enough salary, if possible, to be able to, especially if I have this Pickett team on maybe 2 teams out of my 5, to be able to have different combinations I can go to based on what happens with the 1:00 players as the slate goes along prior to the 4:00 games lock. So on this team, I have Rachaad White. We all know about Carolina. You're able to run on them. Rachaad White is the alpha running back for Tampa. They're at home, coming off a tough loss. Rachaad White just, can run, can catch. I think he's in a great spot there. We have Deebo Samuel, still at a pretty affordable price on FanDuel. I figure against a team like the Eagles, they're going to need him. I think they're going to deploy him more than they would in other games where maybe they're more of a dominant favorite. And then as the skinny stack to Deebo, I have DeAndre Swift in the flex spot. Obviously, we have a couple of questionable tags by Hill and DeAndre. Not really too worried about them, but obviously they're worth monitoring. They may just be veteran rest type stuff. But what I really like about this team, so those 3 late spots who are currently occupied by Rachaad White, Deebo Samuel, and DeAndre Swift. And now let me go to my screen here. You could easily take those 3 out, and you give yourself so many combinations that are just as relevant to maybe pursue based on how your 1:00 core may do. So one example I'll give you could put DeAndre Swift as the running back. Then you can put in, let's say, Brandon Ayuk for the wide receiver. And then in your flex, you'd still have salary to be able to play Adam Thielen or Amari Cooper for instance. Or you could do DeAndre Swift, keep Debo in, and then that gives you in your flex spot, you can go to Devontae Smith, skinny Batman, especially if Goddard's not going to play again. I don't know how much relevance there is to that, but it does seem like when Goddard's not in there, Devontae Smith is they need him to be much more involved. So I'm really loving the different combinations you can concoct with that salary left over and those spots saved for late swap purposes for that pivotal, what I believe to be a pivotal Eagles 49ers game in the late window. And there's only 3 games in the late window. So that's really the main one, other than, you know, the Bucks maybe smashing on Carolina, or maybe Carolina now with their new setup, you know, maybe being a little more, you know, having a little bit more gusto to maybe give Tampa Bay a game for all we know. I remember a couple of years ago.
Being functional.
Yeah, maybe more functional.
Bar's not high here.
You know, it's funny. I remember things. I remember there was a couple of years ago. It was definitely Carolina, and it was Brady. I think it was the first play of the game. He just threw a 50-yard bomb to Evans.
And he dropped it.
He just dropped a surefire touchdown. So stuff like that, you know, it can always happen, even though Carolina's more known to be better against the pass.
It was last year, like week 6 or 7. Cost me a lot of money. I don't want to talk about it.
I watched it before my eyes too. I had Evans that week. You can get to Evans. You can get to A.J. Brown. You can even get to Christian McCaffrey with that salary left over and put in like Godwin and then somebody else in the flex. And so I just love the flexibility of the different combinations that you have at your disposal based on how your 1 o'clock floor does on this particular week. And I'll throw it back to you, sir.
Yeah, you can get to Njoku there with Godwin.
That's what I was going to say. You could double tight end Njoku. I like the Njoku's spot this week as well.
You know, it's an interesting thing. Like the first thing, Zach Moss, which, like you said, he's going to be like 50% owned. Like his current ownership projection that I'm seeing is like over 50%, which is pretty wild. I know it was actually Taylor's first game back was against the Titans, who are generally a very good run defense, but he had 23 runs, 165 yards, 2 touchdowns, caught 2 passes for 30 yards. He had 32.5 FanDuel points. I mean, just insane when you think about it. And at that price, like, yeah, it makes sense. The same token, you know, the Tennessee run defense generally pretty solid. And, you know, it's a really interesting thing because this is where the contest you're playing matters so much. Because the reality, like in this contest you're in, like you're kind of just better off playing him probably. You know, there can be some leverage, sure, like if he falls off, like, but if when he reaches a certain level of ownership, it's like, okay, well, if he puts up like an 18-point game, you're almost like dead. Because, and especially in like, this is a 430 person tournament, the winning score is going to be significantly lower in this than it is in a lot of those bigger ones. So like, you don't need to be perfect. And it's especially when it's a chalk piece like this, his price is so much lower than any other like feature back. So like in this type of contest now in the Millie, you know, that's where you really got to dig into like the game theory of it. That's where there's a lot deeper because you're going to have to kind of hit the nuts to have a chance to win that anyways. But in this tournament, you know, his ability to sink you basically with just getting his expected workload and falling in the end zone once, you know, is pretty high. So yeah, I mean, I think even at 50% owned, you know, I don't think it's like a terrible play in this smaller field contest. Now, if you weren't going to play it, that's where I would definitely want to, you know, I actually think the Tennessee defense is like an awesome leverage play this week. They're 3,400 only. Actually, I haven't even looked at, are they going to be high owned? Decently, like 10% projecting right now. But still, that's like a fifth of Moss's ownership. So you got to think, if Moss fails, how would that happen? To me, the Titans defense would make sense. Minshew takes sacks. He can be reckless with the ball sometimes. So just something to think about. It's such an inflection point on a slate like this when you have a player like that. He's a fine play. He's a good play, especially in this type of contest. But if you weren't going to play him, you got to think long and hard about what that means and how you're going to, play off of that. Like, I'm fading him. How do you pull that lever, as JM likes to say? Last year, JM and I, we were touting Kenny Pickett pretty heavily, and he showed a lot of things early when he started, how he would, some chances he would take, some windows he would try to hit with his throws, that we both kind of saw the same thing. Like, this guy with, they've got some weapons around him, like this could really take off. And it never really happened. I don't know if you saw this, but the Steelers last week, they had over 400 yards of total offense.
Mm-hmm.
During the entire Matt Canada era, they never reached 400 total yards of offense.
I heard that actually on a show, but that's unbelievable. Yeah.
Wild. Like, they didn't score a ton of points. Like, it really was kind of the perfect, the way the game played out was kind of perfect because would they score 13 points or something? What was the final score of that game? I don't even remember. I'll look it up. 16-10 they won.
17-10.
So that, they scored 16 points. So it's not like they had this huge offensive explosion that draws a ton of attention, but like, it's definitely things have improved quickly. And now they face this Cardinals team that, just got run over by the Rams. I think Jaylen Warren is a good play this week. I also think he'll be somewhat popular because he's only $6,500. So yeah, I think that the Steelers, Pickett is, he's sub 7K, and his team should score some points this week. They should move the ball, should score some points. I think Pickens and Freiermuth are. Did you see? Speaking of Jaylen Warren, did you see the video of his fumble?
Oh yeah, it was at the beginning of the game, right?
Yeah, but then did you see the Deontay Johnson?
Oh,
So
no.
Johnson was like blocking. He's on the perimeter, like blocking, and he's supposed to be blocking. He basically, like, the ball snapped, and he just kind of stands there and watches it, and then he's just walking away as the ball like comes squirting out of the pile, and it goes like right past him, and then the Bengals recover it and go running by him, and he's just like oblivious to what's going on. Kind of like checked out. He also dropped a touchdown.
He did.
So it's one of those things where, like, this is where, like, you look at like Tomlin's kind of like, he's a player's coach, but he's also like, he doesn't pull any punches. They kind of have three main targets there in Johnson, Pickens, and Freiermuth. And I can't imagine Johnson's in a very good place with the coaching staff after, that sort of stuff. So, I think those are both, I think it's a nice way to play it. And again, do I think a Kenny Pickett double goes for some, crazy score that is going to win you the millie? Probably not. But I do think that he's a good play at his price. And if you lock in his two most likely touchdown scorers at reasonable prices, that's a nice block. And I think that combined with Moss is kind of a great starting point. And it just kind of plays off of that. Like, Moss will be high owned, but immediately you play a Pickett double and, you're differentiated. So that's where there's a lot of talk last week on the site. I know in Discord was very active. A lot of people debating playing Jonathan Taylor or not. And it's individual ownership can kind of be overrated sometimes. It's, the whole lineup that matters. So no, I like where you went with this. Tyreek Hill. This is like wild. Like, I can't stop thinking back to the it was after Achane went out. Then the Dolphins played the Panthers, who were like, they've gotten a little better, I guess, but they were clearly the worst run defense in the league at that time. They were getting gouged by everyone, and the Dolphins were really good at running the ball. And it seemed like too obvious, but it was just like as simple as play the feature back Raheem Mostert against the worst run defense. And now this week you've got Tyreek Hill trying to set records facing by far the worst pass defense in the league. So, his price tag is high. It's really, really hard to see him not putting a big game this week, right?
You would think. It is football.
It's hard to see him not getting 100 yards. I guess touchdowns can be fluky, but I would say like 100 yards and a touchdown seems like a pretty safe bet. I think the biggest concern might be like just legit if they get up too much and kind of take the foot off the gas. But even there, again, with this size of contest, I think he's all right. And he can definitely bury you if you don't play him, even at 10K.
Tyreek Hill's in every week for me until further notice. I think it will be curious to see if Achane comes back this week or not, as far as the running between him and Mostert. A couple things to play off of you, though. Yeah, guys, if you're going to play Moss, it's not a bad play. Just differentiate your lineup somewhere else. And then to Mike's point, if you're not going to play Moss, the best thing to do is create leverage with something like a Titans defense that takes away from everybody who does have Moss. So if there's a way to play him, then there's a way to not play him and also leverage yourself, above the field if he doesn't do well. Something else with Deontay Johnson, he's actually 6,800 this week. George Pickens is 200 less. I will gladly take the ceiling of Pickens at $200 less over the floor of Deontay at 68. And that's why I like Pickens in the stack for the ceiling that he's capable of. And Deontay's definitely had some bad body language, to your point.
Well, and he doesn't even really have a floor. He's got he hasn't scored double digits in the last 3 games.
You could argue not even a floor. Yeah.
Yeah. So like even he used to be known for the floor. Pickens obviously hasn't done great, but just his skill set, the big bodied receiver, he can make plays down the field. Kind of makes sense. I think the Pickett Freiermuth is probably the sharp, the sharp stack. And then if you're going to add one more, I think I agree that Pickens might be the play, or even Warren.
Yep.
If you just want to bet on the Steelers offense.
I had a lot of Warren last week. Obviously, Najee got the touchdown. If Warren gets that touchdown instead of Najee, then it's more, a little more respectable score for Warren. But I agree with you. I think it's just a matter of time when they figure out, how capable he is over Najee.
Yeah, Saints defense is an interesting one too. I kind of like the call. Just, we'll see what happens. But we've seen Jared Goff go from hero to zero in the past too. I don't think anybody's going to play the Saints defense. And obviously we saw what the Packers did on a short week to Goff. So, that'll be an interesting spot for sure. I'm really interested to see just in general what happens with Detroit this week because they've had so much hype around them. And then they just totally dropped the ball on Thanksgiving. So will be interesting to see how they respond. I guess the Saints have to respond too. They're kind of backs against the wall. Their coach and Derek Carr are both kind of coming under fire right now. What was the other? Oh, you've got the original. You had Rachaad White.
Yep.
And
the original combo was Rachaad White, Deebo Samuel, and then we had DeAndre Swift in the flex. Obviously, guys, if you're doing late swap, you always want a 4:00 player in your flex for the most part, unless you have a 4:00 quarterback shell core maybe, and then you flip it around. But yeah, if you have noticed, Jared Goff I've kind of been, sometimes you just go by trends. He hasn't been looking that good lately. not just Thanksgiving, just like the last few weeks. That's why I'm figuring, New Orleans is capable of really putting pressure on. And, obviously they had that big game against New England, which, it's not much to say for because New England's so bad. But yeah, Saints are capable, I think, at home. And to your point, they lost a tough one to Atlanta. They kind of got to stay in the mix. So it will be interesting.
Yeah. And then, that San Fran Philly game, that'll be an interesting kind of leverage point. It'll be an interesting point to kind of see where the week goes. And like you said, you mentioned that Buffalo Philly game. It'll be interesting to see if like people try to chase that a little bit. I think that the way you're playing it here with like a skinny stack, I think that's kind of how I would approach it. I've actually got some interest in Philadelphia defense this week. I keep talking about defenses, but I think they're a good unit, sub 4K. And you look at Brock Purdy, I think it's interesting. I saw a stat. He's like QB1 in several stats. At home, on the road, he's struggled a bit more. It'll just be interesting to see how that game plays out here. Like I said, I think you got the Eagles defense, which is so good against the run. And that's kind of how the Niners offense is built. And then obviously both teams are going to be fully up for the rematch. The Niners think they got screwed last year with Purdy getting hurt in the championship game. So, one way or another, it's going to be a really fun game to watch. It's I don't think I'm going to be like full stacking it the way I was attacking Buffalo Philly last week, though.
It's very interesting you would bring up the Eagles defense. So I saw something that I think somebody said, I think it may have been John Hansen. I'm sure you follow him probably. He said it's the first time ever that a 10-1 team, or I think they're 10-1, has ever been. See, Vegas is viewing this, I think, as the 49ers on the over-under are the favorites in this.
Yeah,
they're against a 10-1 team.
Yeah.
I don't think that's ever happened.
Yeah, a team 10-1 or better, being a home underdog, I think was it's only happened like once in history or something.
So Vegas is trying to tell us that, the Eagles have been getting lucky on some of these wins, like kind of pulling them out at the end. I mean, obviously it's a tribute to Jalen Hurts, I believe, on one spectrum of it. He's that guy. He's just supreme confidence. But then you could also say a lot of balls have bounced their way for them to survive in a couple of these wins they've had.
Oh, no question. I mean, I think it's going to be a good game. I think it's two good teams. I guess my greater point, I guess you could go either way with it. I just view with either defense, I guess, I think this game could end up, I think it's more likely to end up like a 20-17 game than like last week. That game, one way or another, was going to get there. That's kind of how I felt coming in. I could see this being like more of like a slugfest, low scoring game just because of how the teams are built, I guess. And the Niners defense is a little more solid. I don't see it getting like turning into a track meet. But it'll be interesting. That's why they play the games, right?
Right. And then again, you have the Tampa offense too that you can kind of shift to, maybe that may be lower owned at home against Carolina. Rashad White, Carolina's been known more for stronger in the past, but Evans is another one. He's just hot right now. I think Evans is playing for a contract, isn't he? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he wanted one before the season, then he didn't get it. Although, I mean, the contract stuff, especially for a wide receiver, like doesn't really matter that much to me because they don't control if they still have to, somebody's got to throw them the ball, maybe
on the motivation end.
What's that? Maybe
for his own motivation. He's kind of looks like he's been playing angry actually, which I love to see from Evans. Sometimes he tends, I don't know, feels like he's passive maybe, but it looks like he's been kind of focused. And Pickens is another one. No Canada. Pickens' motivation is probably like at the ceiling now, being so happy to feel like he can breathe being out from under the Canada regime.
Yeah, I mean, that again, that's where that sort of stuff I think is noisier than reality. Like I don't look at like these NFL players. I mean, there's some instances. I think it's more, I think you can see more when like a guy is checked out, like how Deontay Johnson kind of looked checked out. Or there's like negative stuff, but like otherwise, like even like the people talk about like the revenge narrative or the whatever, like outside of like a quarterback who, they're having to make decisions, or maybe they're able to like check or audible, like the angry Tom, the Brady thing, like you could for sure see there were some games where they'd be up 2 touchdowns and in the red zone and he'd check to a passing play because like he wanted to, you know what I mean? But like for a running back or receiver, they're just like, they're not in control there. Whereas a quarterback or even like a coach, those are the spots that I lean into more. The Pickens thing, I don't think it would necessarily have anything to do with his motivation, just that the offense is going to be more efficient and his skill set won't be just ignored, I guess. That's kind of how I view it, at least. But I mean, the Tampa offense, the Panthers defense has struggled. And, if the Panthers offense picks it up a little, you could kind of sneak your way into a little back and forth game. So definitely an interesting spot to look at too.
Yeah, that would be a Rachaad White, maybe Thielen, although I think people are probably afraid of Thielen after last week. He got like 1 target, but, still capable. Yeah.
All right. I think that's it then. I'll stop sharing here. Yeah, I think we get a pretty good breakdown. Again, only 10 games on the slate. So watch those injury reports. We're getting into December now, so I have to watch the weather a little bit. Don't overreact to it, though. I know there was some people who were like panicking because there was going to be rain in Philadelphia last week. I was in Discord trying to talk people off the ledge. Hopefully they stayed on the game. But it's generally only like the extremes that are really gonna change that. So thank you for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe. We will be back to you next week for week 14. And yeah, Max, you got anything before we go?
No, like you said, the weather will start to come into play slightly, and watch the injury reports. A lot of players are banged up. You got Qs all over the player list. So just be alert, and then obviously stay tuned for the 1 week season scroll and the edge. And I love listening to Xandermere and Hilo show in the OWS Discord on Saturdays. So yeah, stay tuned for all the goodness that OWS brings to kind of help us steer the boat to hopefully get to the finish line.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks, Maximus. We'll see you next week. We'll see you all next week. See you at the top of the leaderboards.
1 week season.